Hi, my name is Dustin Gamester, and I'm here to walk everybody through a technology called Entity Signal. And really, the theme of this question, or this topic that is what if Entity Framework and SignalR were friends? So, before I hop into the presentation, though, I just want to quickly do a shameless plug about myself. Make sure I got my presentation set up right. There it goes. All right. So, shameless plug about myself. I am a .NET developer for 9 years. I can soon say 10 years, and very much looking forward to that. I'm also the CTO of a company called MyComply. So we make construction compliance and access control software, and we are always looking for great programmers. So my email will be listed around here a couple times, probably is in the presentation as well. Give me a shout with your resume if you want to talk, and we're set up for remote work, so definitely, we're always looking for good people. You can see kind of at the bottom there some of the stuff that we make. So there's this sort of app that we made, and sort of like a little kiosk thing. And you can just pull up my webcam here, so you can see kind of that. You know, we got sort of one of these units here. It's a dev unit, so it's kind of stripped to the bare bones. So when you look inside of it, it's what we're using, but it's not really anything that a customer is ever going to see. So yeah, we do a lot of cool stuff, and one of those things is Entity Signal, I guess. So this talk is going to be divided into three parts. It should take about 30 minutes, is kind of my guess. 30 minutes, and then we'll leave some room for questions. And if people really want, we can do some more examples. But really, 30 minutes and questions, so probably 45 minutes in total is kind of what we're shooting for. First part of the talk is going to be just going over what Entity Signal is. Then we'll just do a quick code demo and then open the floor to questions. So let's start off with what is Entity Signal. So Entity Signal is comprised of two technologies. So the first is Entity Framework. It should be near and dear to many of your hearts, but for those of you who don't know, Entity Framework is Microsoft's preferred ORM. So it's the thing that allows you to save objects to the database, whether the database is Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, all those kind of things. They just sort of work with Entity Framework, and it's a few config things you have to change, but fundamentally it's the same. It'll also allow you to query the database. So sort of the two major features of Entity Framework, and as you can see, this little animation on the bottom basically shows that new object gets made, Entity Framework saves the object and gives it an ID. Is kind of the real simple version of Entity Framework and what it does. There's also another technology that Microsoft makes called SignalR. So SignalR will allow you to send messages to clients in real time. So with SignalR, you don't really have to refresh the page in the case of a web page, or poll for the data in the case of an app or anything like that. So we can see here this little animation. Basically, the new object comes in, and then you can sort of fire things off to respective clients, whether it's a web page, a computer app, or a mobile app. So what we have is Microsoft has a way of saving data to the database. And Microsoft has a way of sending data to the clients. But there really isn't a way to link the two. These are sort of two completely different projects. At least that hasn't been the case up until now. So Entity Signal kind of bridges that gap. So it watches Entity Framework and watches for saves, deletes, updates to objects, and then we'll basically find who is subscribed to the changes in respect to that object, and we'll send updates to the subscribed users in real time. So you can basically have a object saved anywhere in your system, and then have that object be sent to all the clients who basically have that object loaded in. The way that this sort of works at a fundamental level, and I'm going to go sort of more proper examples of this in a little bit, but really what Entity Signal looks for is sort of a subscription. So in this case, you can subscribe just to the raw message type if you want to, but you can also specify a pattern. So basically, in this case, we're seeing that we're subscribed to messages where the ID is even, basically, or is it odd? Well, one of the two. Doesn't make a difference. The other thing though is you could make it so that you subscribe to companies with ID 10. You could make it to subscribe where, posts is equal to my posts. And you have sort of a live view of your posts. And it's really just done all through Entity Framework, and then Entity Signal will update the clients in real time. So that's kind of the basic version of Entity Signal. And before I move on to the code demo, are there any questions? Just in case anybody's got sort of a high level question of what's going on. So let's assume nobody asks any questions, or if they do, just, hopefully I'll see them. So in this case then, let's move on to the code demo. So we are going to do this code demo real raw. So I'm going to load up old Visual Studio, our tried and true friend, create a new project. This is going to be an ASP.NET Core application. I'm going to call it Entity Signal 2020-04-25. Create that. And then it's going to be a project with a individual user account, so that way we have database connection and all that stuff kind of pre-made. Hit create, do a little dance while it's making that. We're going to start off with a 100% vanilla project. So we're also going to pull up the Entity Framework documentation, or Entity Signal documentation, that is. So if you go to entitysignal.com, at the very top, click Quick Start, you can kind of see just this is the quick way to get started here. So first thing you gotta do, obviously install the NuGet package. So go to your package manager console, or however you decide to install them, and just run install package entity-signal.server. So that will do its thing, and we will see in a second. Manage NuGet packages. That Entity Signal server is installed, and you're all good to go. So we do have to make some changes to the startup. So the first thing we have to do is basically add Signal R, and then after adding Signal R, add Entity Signal. And this can really be done anywhere. We'll put it right above the add MVC in this case. And we will tell it to use Entity Signal. And the next thing you have to do is in the configure, basically just expose an endpoint called /datahub. Now we're using ASP.NET Core 2.2, but if you're using 3.0, this is sort of the new command that they introduced. So we're going to go here and put a new little section here, uncomment this, and use the Entity Signal Hub. So this data hub can be configured. So if you happen to have something that's already using the term data hub, then you can configure that. But the default is data hub, and all the libraries assume data hub, but they can be overridden if you so choose. So the next step is to override your DB context. So in this case, we're just going to use the standard identity DB context. You can just extend a standard DB context, and you could also extend just a standard, sorry, you can also not extend, and there's just a little before and after save thing that you have to run that is part of this Entity Signal data process that you'll be importing. So in this case, let's go down to data, application DB context. We are going to now extend a Entity Signal identity DB context. So replace that and give it the namespace. And then we just have to basically dependency inject the Entity Signal data process. And what this will do is basically watch for changes and then notify the respective subscribed clients. So in this case, we can see that now we're inheriting from Entity Signal identity DB context. And yeah, that's sort of the generic config that everybody would have to do. Let me make this even a little bit bigger. I'm guessing that might be difficult for some people to see. So it should be nice and big for everybody here. So now what we're going to do is basically just going to make a standard endpoint. So let's just make a new model class, and we'll just call this, let's call it doctor in the credit of old COVID there. So a doctor obviously is going to need to have a ID, and let's say this doctor also have a name, and let's say this doctor also has an age, and because database fields are cheap, we're going to allow them to have an age that's up to in the billions, let's say. So we got some real old doctors working here. So we're going to add this to the identity DB context here. So we're just going to say public DB set. This is going to be a doctor type, and this is going to be doctors get set. There we go. Using this. So there we go. So now we have a doctor type exposed. So let's just quickly go down here, and I'm just going to say add migration, added doctor. And then it makes the migration, and we just say update database. So this part here should not be blowing anybody's mind, hopefully, but if this is your first experience to Entity Framework, it does a good job. So now basically the database is being updated. This is, of course, just a local database that's running local to this specific project, but you can connect to another project, another database, all that kind of stuff. It's yeah, all the same. So now that we have a data layer connection, now we're just going to make a real simple controller. So we're just going to hit add and do a controller. We'll just make a standard MVC controller. We're going to say use the doctor data type, DB context, and we'll call it the doctor's controller. I think it's a fairly safe name for for something like that. So we'll start it up. And there we go. So now we have a standard doctor's controller. So let's just take a look and see what we got right here. And then we'll basically see how we can make this become real time with Entity Signal. So, oopsies. Let's go full screen. It's bigger. So we're going to go to the slash doctor's endpoint. We can see that there are no doctors. We click create new. There's a new doctor. We'll call him Dr. Dustin, and he's going to be 33, let's say, something like that. So we can see that, and yep, nothing that should be really blowing anybody's mind. You can edit Dustin too, can delete, and standard sort of stuff. The problem is this doesn't use Entity Signal, and it's not a very interesting demo. The other thing is if I open up a new tab and created a new doctor, and we're going to call this Dr. Kyle, and he's going to be 33, it doesn't show up here. And it really would be nice if it did. So let's just make some changes here. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the doctor's endpoint and just get rid of this query. So we're going to make it so that the doctor's endpoint just returns an empty list effectively, or we don't enumerate the list effectively. Then we're going to introduce a new endpoint. We'll just extend that one. And this endpoint is going to return a IEnumerable of doctor. This is going to be all doctors. And in this case, all we're going to do is instead of returning the view, we're just going to return the raw data. So in this case, this is pretty standard. The first change that we have to make for Entity Framework in respect to a data type is basically making a subscribe endpoint. So this endpoint right here can actually function normally. So if you call this endpoint without Entity Signal, it will actually work fine. But if you use this Entity Signal subscribe, so we're going to dependency inject. So we'll do private, read only, and then we'll make a new thing here. Entity Signal subscribe. use that. Do this here. And I think we've all done this 1,000 times, but. So now what we have is the Entity Signal subscribe service inside here. And we're going to subscribe to all types of doctor. So whenever a doctor object gets edited, this is effectively subscribed to it, and it will subscribe to all doctors in this respect. So let's go back here. Oopsies. Start it up again. Go to /doctors, and there we go. Problem is, the doctors aren't there, and that's because we still need to write code to expose them. So we're gonna have to hit this all doctors endpoint. So we're gonna go over to this index here. We're just gonna add some sneaky, hacky little code. Section scripts. And we're gonna do this in the beginning with just vanilla.js. So we'll start, and we're gonna switch on over to the quick start here. So basically we're just gonna add the SignalR minified version, and then the entity signal JavaScript. And we have to escape this ASP.NET. And we're also going to just create a client and begin syncing with that client. So in this case, our endpoint is /doctor/all doctors. Hit save, and basically what this does, script type, type is equal to text/JavaScript. There we go. So what this does here is basically it makes a new entity signal client, and you just need one client. And then we tell this client to sync with the endpoint doctor/all doctors. And this sync with passes some special parameters to this doctors controller, and then they get picked up here. And this is kind of where the subscribe happens, and kind of the way that the entity signal, the SignalR gets paired to the entity framework. So in this case, we just sync with this, and then when it comes back, we pass this thing to a variable called synced list. So let's just see what that does. So if I go here and open up a new console, maybe we'll go full screen, hit refresh. I don't think there's a way to make this console any bigger, unfortunately. 404 doctor all doctors. I think actually it's doctors all doctors. There we go. That would explain it. So we can now see that we've connected to the data hub, and we have a WebSocket connection to our entity signal client effectively. So let us pull up this synced list. So we can see in synced list here that there is one person. I don't know if there's a way to make this bigger. That's great. So let's go like this. So we can see in the sync list that there's one user effectively whose name is Kyle and is age 33. So we're going to go into a completely new tab here. So this is not at all the same tab as this one. We're going to make a new doctor. We're going to call this Dr. Kyle. Kyle the second, let's say. And Kyle the second sounds like a pretty old name. Let's say he's 80 years old. So hit create, go over here, and we go back here. Now we're going to pull up the sync list again. We can see that there are two people. So we can see Kyle and Kyle the second, who's aged 80. So we've seen now that we can create something and have it show up in the sync list automatically, which is really cool. But it actually isn't limited to create. So let's say we're going to edit. So we're going to go doctors/edit. And I think Doctor 1 is already used. So let's edit Doctor 2, because the ID is 2 here. So we'll see Kyle. And let's just say Kyle is not very happy about being Kyle the first. And he really wants to stand out. So he changed his name to Bruce Maddox. Hit save. Let's say we go back here. So now we pull up that same sync list, and we haven't refreshed the page, we haven't done anything like that. And we can see that ID 2 was Kyle and is now Bruce Maddox. So then we could say, Kyle II, not a huge fan of how Bruce Maddox changed his name. So we can go in here and we can say doctors/delete doctors 3. So this will allow us to delete Kyle the second. And I just want to emphasize the point that this is all happening on a different tab, and that the only change that we did to the doctor's controller was just add a subscribe to the all doctors endpoint. So I click delete, then I go back here, I pull up the sync list once again, and we see that Kyle the second has been removed from the list, and now it's just Bruce Maddox. So this basically demonstrates how Entity Signal is able to add things, edit things, and delete things, all without having to refresh the page, which really is great. And this synced list is fantastic. It sort of gives a hook point for other frameworks to use to sort of display it in a different way. So what I'm going to do next here is I'm going to basically take this synced list and kind of add it to the HTML. And the library I'm going to use for that is actually AngularJS. And the reason for that is, well, first of all, I still use AngularJS at work, but it does work with React, it does work with Vue. We might be able to do an example of these later on. It's just I'm most familiar with AngularJS, so I'm going to kind of stick with that. So in this case, we just need to bring in Angular. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio here, and instead of bringing in Entity Signal and SignalR, we're going to bring in Angular, SignalR, and then sort of a version of Entity Framework that, Entity Signal that works with AngularJS. So there's just some scoping issues, and there's the same sort of thing with React that that gets addressed in the example. So in this case, mark as rad, we're going to change around our code here as well. So what we need to do is we need to basically make this into a app. So let's go, oopsies, /div ng app is equal to, let's call it app. And then just to test that it got loaded, we'll do a standard little test of 5 + 5. So we are going to make a new module here. And basically, we're just going to load in an Angular module called app, and then we'll load in the Entity Signal library for Angular effectively. So if I go back to our running example and hit refresh here, we should see that flash of 5 + 5 is now 10. So we know that AngularJS has loaded successfully. So what do we do from here? Well, basically we need to make this synced list show up in the front. So what we're going to do is we're just going to say, it's real nasty, we're going to say root scope, and we're just going to bring in root scope over here. And then we're going to take almost the exact same code that we had down here. And maybe just get rid of this because we don't really need 2 clients. We can have them if we so choose, but it's not really necessary. So instead of synced list x, we're just going to say root scope dot synced list is equal to x. And then up here, we are just going to dump synced list. So we're setting the synced list to root scope, and we'll be able to basically see this change in real time. So if we hit refresh here, we get an error, client is not defined. Client, oh yes, because we have to say Entity Signal, not client, because we got rid of the other reference. So we go back here. Well, I thought it was just Entity Signal dot syncs with. Let me just find out what happens when I do this here. Yeah, that does work. Yeah, okay. So yeah, and we just replace client with Entity Signal. Hit save here, hit refresh. Now we can see that Bruce Maddox, age 33, is here. We're going to go over here, click create new, We're going to call this Dr. Dre. We'll say age is 2001. Hit create. Go back here. We can now see Dr. Dre, age 2001, has been made successfully. So we're just going to quickly change this around so that now we have this code inside of here. Maybe keep the create new at the top here. And we're just going to say tr maybe ng-repeat for list item in synced list. We're going to have, it's not going to be list item dot name, and then list item dot age. So if we hit refresh on this, you should now start to see this get populated. Except it doesn't. And you repeat list item in synced list. Synced list. Let's have to look up the ng repeat. Let's just see if I got that right. In. Yeah, that's right, yeah. List item in synced list. List, oh yes, because it makes them lowercase n, as we can see here, yeah. So it's lowercase n, lowercase a. Hit refresh. There we go. So now we can see Bruce Maddox, age 33, Dr. Dre, age 2001. And we'll also add in the actions, just because we like to show off. So we're going to do the edit and delete, and instead of ASP actions, we're basically just going to make these be href is equal to slash doctors slash edit slash, this is going to be list item dot ID. And this guy here will be list item dot ID, and it'll be delete. Save that, hit refresh. So there. So now we can see if we have this app running in 2, we have Bruce Maddox and Dr. Dre over here. If I edit Bruce Maddox and make him age 333, hit save, it changes here, and it also changes here. So this is really cool. This is sort of restating what we've already seen, but showing that it can use existing JavaScript libraries. The next step is basically to pose the scenario, what if we didn't want to display all doctors? Seems like a reasonable thing. What if we just want to display doctors that have the first letter D in their name, let's say? So what we're going to do here then is we're going to go back to the doctors controller. We're just going to make a new endpoint. So let's say doctors whose name starts with D. And in this case, we're going to add a link query, or not a link query, a function here. So this is basically going to say, find me all doctors where their name starts with D. And now in this case, and I guess we have to change that here as well. So we're going to say context dot doctors dot where, and we'll just do this here. There we go. And you could save this to a variable and that kind of stuff if you really wanted to, but this works in a pinch as well. So we now have doctors whose name starts with D. So we're going to go back to this index here, and we're going to make another table. So we have this right here is going to be H2, and we're going to say this is going to be all doctors table. We're now going to make another table, and this is going to be doctors whose name starts with D. And this is going to be called, we'll just call it the D list for D list celebrities. And then we just simply go over here, entity signal, same thing. And we're just going to save this to the D list, and this is going to be doctors whose name starts with D. There we go, hit save on this. So if we hit refresh, we should only see doctors whose name starts with D in this view here. So we'll just hit start. Go to / doctors endpoint here. Now we can see the doctors whose name starts with D right here. So let's say Bruce Maddox. We'll open this up in a new tab just to show that everything's real time. Bruce Maddox changes his name to Dwayne Maddox. And instead of 333, he's going to be 334. He's really getting old and up here. We hit save. We can now see that Dwayne Maddox shows up within doctors whose name starts with D. When we go back here, we can also see that he shows up in the real-time view as well. So we can basically set these queries to subscribe to almost any pattern. So if you have, say, companies whose ID is equal to 10, you could subscribe to that. You could subscribe to users of company whose ID is equal to 10. Those types of things. You could say, subscribe to things that match my user ID. And really, the possibilities of this are almost endless. So that is sort of the basics of Entity Signal. There's just a few more things I just kind of showcase that are kind of cool little clever add-ons, effectively, I guess. So what you have here is sort of a real-time connection to this, of course, and it basically stores this until you say desync from, or what is it again? It's let me just pull it up. I think I have it in one of these examples. If I go to the React investigation, I think I remove it in this one. Entity signal, sync with, so client, off data change. Well, it exists. It's in the autocomplete if you really need it. But basically, yeah. If we run something like this, and let's just say 10 seconds later, let's just pretend, or maybe a better way to say this is, when you run this query, so let's pretend in the system that we call up doctors all over the place. So we're calling doctors up, on every modal and all this kind of stuff. A lot of the time what will happen is you click create new, pull up a modal. You don't really know if you have the doctors list. So you pull that up and basically you get the doctors list. Every single time you open up a modal, you're getting this doctors list. Well, what Entity Signal allows you to do is you basically have this synced. So if you return or run this anywhere, this will return instantly. So it doesn't actually go to the server if it has a cached version. So the second query is always instantaneous, which is fantastic. That really speeds things up a lot. So what that allows then is your load off the server to be reduced dramatically, because you're not sort of overwhelming it with all these little queries that sort of add up over time. And yeah, that's kind of Entity Signal. We can have a more advanced example if we really wanted to. It's definitely a lot of potential. But before I do, I wouldn't mind just sort of going to any questions.